To the middle building would switch story to the men's dorm. I was counting.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
All right, we are going to get started here. So welcome to the City Council Oversight Committee meeting of Thursday, November 9th, 2023. We have 3 items on our agenda today, and we will start with an update on our emergency shelter. So I will recognize April.
Oh,
Sorry, April.
Sorry. We were just talking about what we were about to talk about, so.
Well, let's talk about it for real.
That's
Super
okay.
timely.
Okay, so you guys received some reports from me. The kind of main report that I provided for you, the one that has our logo at the top, is one you get every month. I did include some additional information that we talked about at our last meeting, kind of toward the bottom where you can see the number of guests that have income or are working. In the month of October was 30 of our 94 guests are working or had income. One of the things we talked about last month is the critical thing is that having income is great, but oftentimes it's not enough money, whether you're working at Taco Casa or Homeland, it's not enough money to pay a rent. So most of our guests are waiting on housing vouchers or some type of housing program to get out into permanent housing. So that's why you'll see we have 30 people working. We were able to get 10 people into permanent housing in the month, and that was just the ones that we were able to find a housing voucher for or get into either our housing or partner housing as well. So I had a meeting, I visited with another council member who's not here tonight, but we talked about some other things that we do at Food and Shelter that a lot of people are not quite aware of, and I just wanted to bring up some of those things. Like, for instance, we do help people get their documents. A low barrier shelter doesn't mean that we don't ask for identification or we don't look at their identification. If they don't have it, that's not a reason they can't come to shelter, but it's the first things we start to work on. So I noted here that in the month of October, we helped 26 guests get some type of documentation, an ID, birth certificate, social security cards. Those are not necessarily important to us as a shelter provider as much as they're required for work and housing. So that's why we work on those. And then we also have guests that come here and maybe they're not from here, they came here for work and then that didn't work out, or they came here for mental health care and were released here. And when we find out that they have a place to stay, whether it's their own place or family housing somewhere else, and they want to go there, we verify that they have a place to live when they get there, and then we put them on a bus. And I don't have my glasses on, so I think that was 6 people in the month of October that we relocated back to their original hometown.
Okay, any questions? Anybody?
Any notable issues over the last month? Or?
So we had an issue. There was a person that was new to us who came to shelter. He had some behavioral issues. I don't know where he came from. I didn't get a whole part of his story, but he did break a window at a friend's house. It was not a significant break. Luckily, we had put security film on the windows before we opened up, and so it broke. We've got the glass ordered. It's going to be replaced next week.
Okay.
And so we've put up some of those I guess screens, the vinyl screens on some of the windows that have the artwork on them.
Yeah.
And so there's talk of potentially doing those around the whole building.
Yeah.
Right.
So there was an art piece. It's a vinyl sticker, window sticker, that was put up on the CouchCom building. That's not the building that we use. But because that came up and it's so attractive and exciting to see when you drive by, we've gotten lots of interest from other artists in the community that want to continue that down the windows. And so we were talking before the meeting about the Norman Arts Council being willing to consider some funding for those art pieces, as well as some private funders who want to just continue that down to just create, like I said, even if we're not in that building, it's a really nice thing to have art and murals. It's kind of one of our key cool things.
Yeah, and one of the other positives to that is like if a window is broken, then the glass is kind of like retained on that plastic film and a bit safer. We're not, seeing
Shards
glass
of
explode
glass or-
out
yeah, yeah, yeah.
inside the building or outside the building,
Yeah.
that needs to be cleaned up. It's a little bit, safer and easier
Yeah.
to manage when, because that things happen.
Yeah, well, we were concerned about that from the beginning, so we hired a company to come in and put on a really nice security film. It's on the inside of the window, so, yeah, the person that hit it, the hole is a perfect hole. It's not like anything else, it's an unusual thing. But the glass is ordered and it'll be put in this next week.
Awesome. Councilmember Grant.
I was curious, did y'all touch on the upgrades happening? And is that being phased?
So that's why we've got Lance here with us, our building super. Lance is Jason's most recent ad and comes to us from Crosslands Construction with an extensive construction background. We just got back the certification of where asbestos lives in the building. And those are the types of reports that Lance is used to working on, and he can provide some updates on what we can do and how it may impact operations and maybe some alternatives that we didn't consider until we got this report, so.
It's taken a while to get the report back, which is a little aggravating, but we finally got it. We tested from the Couch building all the way down to 109, which is the far east building, for asbestos or any other contaminants. The only building that had anything in it was the east building, 109. There's quite a bit of asbestos in the ceilings and the walls, several walls in that part of the building. I've got with Tech Ann, who's on the state bid contract for asbestos removal. We're going to meet Monday. We have two options we're going to look at. One is if I go ahead and bring a sprinkler system in, and we do minor abatement to get the sprinklers in and move just a few walls. Can we do that and still meet the state requirements of doing it safely? What that price would be compared to if we abate the whole thing, like we're going to demolish it anyway, what would that price be? That way we'll have two ways to look at it and then see what the abatement allow us to do and won't do and what we can do for remodel. Everything on the far north end is an open building shell, so we can still do the men's shelter in there very easily, add a unit and make that one. The slowdown now is that south end that's there. We have the other buildings that checked out without anything in them. There's different issues in every building, from heat and air to plumbing issues on down the line. So I'm just going to try in the next few weeks to try to put together the impact on each building if we try to move it to a building and the impact of abating out that asbestos. And that way I'll give you guys a good direction of what direction would be the best to go financially and the quickest.
So we don't have a timeline yet on when we're going to know about pricing for these two different options, or what is actually possible.
Right. Monday's when a tech in, people will be here and we'll walk the building. They've got the report, they're reviewing it, and then we've got plans from Rick McKinney that we had cleaned up to do that. So he's looking at that overlay to see what walls we can take out, can't take out. And once he gets here Monday and does a walkthrough, he said within 2 or 3 days he'll have pricing back to me. So by the end of next week, I'll have a pretty good figure on it. I have our guys checking all the heat and air units, plumbing, running down that whole section, so I can kind of give us a good feel if we have to move buildings, what we're looking at the next one. So I won't be saying, well, this won't work, here's the next one. I'll try to have all the answers for you by the end of next week.
Okay.
I guess would this be a good time to ask about the Healing Arts Studio? Reached out to Firehouse and asked if they would be willing to do that at a friend's house, and they said yes. Talked to city manager about it. So it's basically folks coming in with. Have you ever done?
I know what it is. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So we were talking about that as an activity in the evening, if that would be helpful.
I think many of our folks would like it. I think in the new designs, if the renovations come forward as we have them right now, each dorm has a community space with tables and chairs where people could sit and do stuff like that. We don't necessarily have that space right now, so we would need to find a space to put some tables and so people could, whatever the art medium would be. But I think it's a lovely idea.
Thank you.
I just wanted to touch real quick. So winter's coming, and these renovations will obviously not expand our capacity before winter. So I just wanted you guys to know that the Norman Caravans and I met today for a lengthy period of time to try to come up with a winter plan. You never really know what kind of winter is coming around the corner, but we are working to have an effective plan in place for winter, including using food and shelter building 24 hours, not necessarily as a shelter, but just that we would be open 24 hours so that people have a spot to get in and get warm in the event something really dangerous happens, as well as, using motels for unique situations as well, so.
I do have a question on that too. Is there coordination with the others in the continuum of care for a winter plan as well?
Historically, it's really just been the caravans group and food and shelter, sometimes in coordination with city staff. So David Grizzle will often reach out to us and coordinate some responses as well. Salvation Army has new leadership, and they're getting very engaged in our continuum. So I'm hoping to be able to partner with them as well.
Thank you.
Councilmember Pullman?
So we had the 1-year birthday last week,
November 1st, yeah.
and in the letter that you wrote about it, or that you all wrote, talked about 516 people that stayed at least one night, and that is in the last year since
Yeah.
last November, and then 141 found permanent housing since then.
Yeah. So, and that was a combination of going back to where they came from or going to stay with family or moving. We've had at least a dozen I can think of move into nursing care or some type of supportive living for senior citizens. So, yeah, we're kind of just looking at creative options on getting people to where they can live.
Very good. Yeah, that was pretty good to see that. I thought that was a good number, 141 people getting out of the situation they're in.
Yeah, 20+%'s not a bad track record.
Yeah.
So I see here on the report from this month too, we had asked about providing some, I guess, numbers on people that, have either a physical disability or something that does not allow them to work, or a chronic health condition. So it's helpful to see some of these numbers. And I guess my question around that would be, how do you work with those individuals? Because I think, not being able to work and have an income, is it setting them up with benefits and the services that they need to then get into housing? What does that process look like?
So we have we've a pretty close partnership with the Social Security Administration, including people who are pretty adept at processing Social Security disability applications. So that's one thing. So we take everybody that comes to shelter, whether it's at a friend's house or at our other locations, we're looking at how to build your resources so you can get into housing. So some people can go to work and we'll help them get cash resources. So you're going to go out, you're going to make money, and you're going to get your own place to live. People who can't work, we're looking at non-cash resources. So how can we get you public benefits, a housing voucher? Can we get you into transition house or one of our other partners that has housing? So we're looking at kind of just what's the best path forward for them. But I mean, ultimately it would start with, can we apply for disability income? So you have eventually some cash coming in. Can we get you on the Norman Housing Authority wait list? So eventually a housing voucher could come in, and then those two things combined can get somebody stably housed.
What is the wait time for vouchers right now?
I'm not really sure. A couple of months ago, they were processing, so a couple of months ago being like maybe September, they were processing February applications. So they were issuing vouchers to February applications, which would mean about six months. People with disabilities come from a different line of vouchers, so sometimes they can go a little faster. It's, you guys have heard from Karen Keenan many times, so it's just it's a unique situation. Their money depends on how many people pay a part of their rent. So if somebody's working and pays a part of their rent, then they can issue another voucher.
Yeah, and then, we're now into the time frame where all of the federal money that was available during the pandemic and, for all kinds of different assistances is now over. That ceases to exist. And so are we continuing to see challenges because of that funding that has dried up?
Yeah, we are back to pre-COVID levels of funding for prevention assistance, which is what we use to keep people from becoming homeless. And the numbers of calls we're taking versus what we can assist is just demoralizing, really. And the same goes for the rehousing dollars that we have. So we're really limited. I mean, we're able to do like 6 to 10 a month versus before we were doing 30 to 40 a month.
Councilmember Montoya.
So you spoke about the time frame to get a housing voucher. So can you talk a little bit about after that process, however many months it takes? So once somebody gets a housing voucher, then what's the time frame in order to find housing?
Yeah, that's also a challenge here in Norman. We don't have the supply of Section 8 housing that we need, particularly one-bedroom houses, which is the bulk of the people that we're working to house are one-bedroom units that would accept a Section 8 voucher. So that definitely is a challenge. Our housing authority is at the table, which makes us like leaps and bounds ahead of other communities. So they're able to go to HUD and get exceptions for things. So a person who needs a one bedroom could possibly get approved for a 2-bedroom if that's all that's available. So it really depends on the unique situation, but that is something, I mean, I know you guys are already talking about the need for affordable housing and all that stuff, but it is, we see people whose vouchers expire and then they have to start the process over because they did not find a housing unit in time.
Okay, so once it
Once it expires.
the process, they're awarded a voucher, and then they have a certain time frame in which to find housing. But the problem is, there's not a lot of available one-bedroom affordable units that qualify for Section 8.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Councilmember Grant.
I was curious, in that shortage of one-bedroom, Section 8 qualifying properties, is the need there also for those type of properties with wraparound services?
So permanent supportive housing is you guys, that came up in your home-based study. So affordable housing in and of itself is just available to market people. And we need that for the whole community. If we don't have that, we're going to just keep seeing more and more people become homeless. So, but permanent supportive housing is what you're talking about. It's a unit that either has a voucher assigned to it or is owned and managed by a place like Food and Shelter. And then it has wraparound service. It has a case manager assigned to that person who sees the housing unit and sees the person several times a week so that we know the place is being taken care of and that they're, following their plan and going to mental health and doing whatever it is they need. That's the kind of housing we really need for a lot of the people we're all thinking about when we think about homelessness. Particularly who we see downtown, who we see in, Andrews Park, et cetera. We really need to invest in that. Food and Shelter is looking to privately do some of that, but it is, we can't solve all the problems. It's really going to take our community to get really invested to that kind of housing to really make some big pass forward.
Yeah, so you mentioned our home-based plan, our action plan. Just to kind of forward telegraph to people, we are going to be talking about that next month, a review of our action plan and an update of the things that we have done so far and the things that we're working towards, and then permanent supportive housing and some other of those action items within the action plan are also on this committee's agenda for the next year.
Right.
So you'll see some of those things specifically related to permanent supportive housing, affordable housing, some of those things that have been identified in our gaps analysis and that we need to work towards. So we will be having those discussions in this committee over the next several months, as we see the turn of the year. But next month, we're going to get an update on where we are with our action plan and kind of things that we need to continue to address and work towards. Yeah. So, I think what I want to emphasize too is that we have our gaps analysis study and we do have an action plan. And so we are working towards those solutions, but they're not simple and it's not just one thing, right? Like having a shelter is not the only solution to address homelessness in our community. And we do have identified action goals to work towards that. Councilmember Holman.
Daryl, the 75 unit project that we're working on, would that one be just an affordable, market affordable complex, or would we be able to do, as we were talking about,
We have our
assign
Yeah.
vouchers
in-house
to it
expert right behind us.
This is.
to ensure that it is being used for affordable housing?
Well, keep in mind, so again, even affordable housing, you're still gonna have that.
Or I guess could be used to address that shortage in Section 8 vouchers.
Exactly.
Right, so, it's just a typical affordable housing unit, it is not permanent supportive housing. That being said, I think Lisa Craig is working on
Yes.
another project that will be coming down the line, so, we need both, and we're wanting to kind of put both projects in the council, but the 75 unit specifically, that one's coming first, that one is just typical affordable housing, not permanent supportive.
Will it accept Section 8 vouchers?
Yes.
Okay.
And that is
So there'll
kind
be
of-
75 new units that will be able to, that will accept the Section 8.
Yeah, and I think it's not just, I think it's specifically the intersection between affordable housing and Section 8. I'm not the best person to speak on that. I know that we are anticipating at least 10 units for, in terms of the Norman Housing Authority has committed to doing 10 project-based vouchers according to the
that's good.
program.
That's
So,
good.
And that will help.
So the voucher follows the unit.
And that will be for
The voucher
one-bedroom-
follows the
one-
person. Yeah.
Specifically one-bedroom units.
Yeah. And project-based vouchers tend to have that wraparound service component with it, if that's, historically, that's how it's worked. So that could be considered a type of permanent supportive housing, so.
Well, one of the things we talked about before that might be worth thinking about some more is some sort of incentive program for residential property owners to get them to accept Section 8 vouchers. Something that would give them some guarantee that if something happens, that their property will be
Like a
taken
risk,
care
a
of.
risk mitigation fund.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Because we
Yeah.
hear that that's a reason why a lot of property owners won't do it, is they just don't want to take the risk of something happening to their stuff and having to be financially on the hook for it, so.
So, in that conversation about where the housing navigator would live and that function wound up, residing at the housing authority. And those are statistics we don't see, but they're readily available. So to get us an update on how the housing navigator has been, in terms of contacts with those property owners and helping educate landlords as to what that voucher means and the support that comes with it in terms of mitigation. And
Yeah.
I'll ask Karen for such a presentation.
It could just be very discouraging, obviously, if you are waiting like 8 months to get one, and you get one, and then you have 60 days or 90, I don't know, to find a place, and then you can't find it, so you lose it. And then you've spent a year basically in this process and ended up right back where you started. Like,
Right.
are you going to want to do that again? And you're just going to give up, so.
We have found that risk mitigation works. We did that, have done that with many different hard-to-house people, and it works.
Okay.
Councilmember Brad?
I was just gonna add, that's also in the home base action plan, that navigator part, and then also a mitigation fund, so.
That
Yeah.
definitely works.
And one other thing too that I'll just mention, as we're thinking about the overarching issue that is homelessness, that would really like to remind people that, the city is no longer the collaborative applicant for the continuum of care, and we do have a continuum of care that is countywide, that, we are still engaged with and, working with, and that there are lots of partners, right? Food and shelter being one of them, Salvation Army, all of these different things that are constantly in communication with the city, but also, we're not the driving force behind a lot of that stuff. And so that action plan really is not just for the city, it's also for the entire county. And so as we have these conversations, it's a broader conversation, a bigger issue than just, the city addressing some of these things, but there are clear ways that the city has the capacity to work on some of these action plans, right? Like affordable housing and permanent supportive housing and some different things that we have
Different,
access
yeah,
to.
diversion programs.
So just kind of want to also continue to reemphasize that this is not just on the city, that we do have partners, in other ways. So, anything else on this one? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
So we will move on to our second item, which is a continued discussion regarding the use of 2 new vans that council authorized in fiscal year '23 during that budget process. So I think I'll recognize the city manager
Thank
to
you.
give us an update.
Our goals and objectives process with our elected officials, this most recent go-around in July. We had some interesting, I think, awakenings during budget development for the current fiscal year, and one of those was a previously a public works function for litter cleanup. And there was a general fund budget allocation of $50,000, and public works staff would hire day labor and go pick up litter. When the wind blows, people's trash cans tip over. There's lots of places where litter gets generated, and the goal was to keep that out of the storm water system. And through the budget development process, it was recognized that that 50,000 wasn't covering enough of the labor cost to pick up all the litter we need, especially through the windy season or in our spring. So that's when we thought, does it belong as a general fund expense, or is it a solid waste function? We're picking up trash. It was in somebody's trash can somewhere, or needs to be in somebody's trash can somewhere. So we kind of reached the conclusion that this probably should be a solid waste function. And now how do we go about doing it? And the prospect of day labor, there's a lot of issues, workers' comp related, and how are you compensating them, and are you adding them to the payroll system, are you handing people out cash? Could we perhaps address the litter cleanup need through a better model with one better organization to utilize maybe a nonprofit entity that does this service already, who would be able to engage with members of the homeless community and provide some purpose, provide some support, and help us meet that need of getting this litter removed before it winds up a storm water problem. So of course, I reached out to Michelle Habenbeck and said, Michelle, I have an idea. Please tell me how crazy this sounds. And lo and behold, Michelle knew exactly what I was talking about and said there is a service provider that does exactly that she was aware of up in Oklahoma City. And we thought that in terms of that relationship to be developed, the ability to identify one of those vans and then wrap it in something that really identifies what we're doing, make Norman a cleaner place. Creative people, not me, need to come up with how this thing could be wrapped. And honestly, vehicle wraps are pretty darn cost effective, but you have this big giant white billboard driving around town making Norman better. We thought we could come up with a plan where we hit Main Street every morning and Gray Street, and that's where the business begins, and then work orders established by folks we have in the field all the time. Parks maintenance guys, utility line maintenance guys, public works guys that are always out and about and see where litter is happening to be able to put on a work order and send it to the entity that would operate the litter crew for us. So I'll turn it over to Michelle and let Michelle describe what she's found and where we think we're able to go relatively quickly here.
Well, I see that Bryce has put up the pictures of the van. So this is the van that we're talking about specifically. You have 2 of them. It's a 2023 Dodge ProMaster van. And I'm going to, Daryl said, no, you don't need to do a presentation, but I'm a spaz. So
Leave it to Michelle.
I did anyway. So it's an RFP. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about is this RFP that we've been drafting the last couple of weeks to put this idea into play. Like Daryl said, there is precedent for this type of program, and I'll talk about it in a second. As you can see on the slide, of course, you guys know litter is anecdotally increasing, right? We see it everywhere. Trash is a problem. We do have a litter crew, and Daryl's right about it being for stormwater. I just want to reiterate that it's was also created for the Lake Thunderbird TMDL. That's a big part of it too. So those are the reasons why we have the litter crew, and it makes sense. So they would also clean up ahead of the mowing crews, which you guys may not have, but that was one of the other reasons, right? It was originally mostly rural to start, to do it ahead of the mowing so that we didn't get the trash everywhere. Now, if we can change it, that would be great, because we also see that some of our community members, we talk about it all the time, have need for employment or services, and maybe we can create something that, two birds, one stone, right? Oklahoma City and Tulsa have a program called A Better Way. Tulsa started it. They started it because they went to Albuquerque, who had the first one in the country. It was called There's a Better Way. So Tulsa went and based it off of Albuquerque. They contracted with Mental Health Association of Oklahoma. So they have a turnkey program. And why do I say that? Because Oklahoma City decided that they wanted to do the same thing. And since MAHOK already had a program, they just contracted with them. So they do both programs in the state. That said, in Norman, we do have several service providers who believe that they can provide the same services and do the same job, so that's why we went RFP. What's in it? It's pretty simple. It's a nonprofit who will develop and operate the program. So we're not developing the program for them. We're going to let them come up with it. Tulsa and Oklahoma City have one way. There are other ways around the country. Savannah, Georgia, New York, lots of other towns now do this. So what we definitely want, though, is a low barrier opportunity for employment. We want people to get a day's wage for the work that they do. We also want to be sure that they're able to do like Daryl said, the morning stuff where all of a sudden, oh goodness, we have all this trash on Main and Gray downtown or Campus Corner, wherever city property is that we can go on for now, because, we can only put people on what we own. That's important to
Does that
know.
include right-of-way?
Yes.
Yes, right of way and easements.
Yeah.
Some.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And, then they can also get the stuff that we need out of the Thunderbird watershed, so that would work. We want them to have access to, and help with those resources. So like April said when she was talking a little bit before, there are residents or people, community members, who don't necessarily, they might be able to see the services but don't know how to actually access them or don't know how to do it appropriately, et cetera. So we would like to see that in there. In the evaluation of the RFP, the largest piece is the services and the proposal content. The second piece are their actual qualifications and past experiences, because we need to know that they're going to be able to perform, right? If they're going to do this program and we want it to succeed, and we really do want it to succeed, then we need to know that they can do it. Soft skill training, that's huge. Every social service, because that's obviously not my bailiwick, I'm learning about it, but every social service provider group that I talked to said soft skill training is super important. Surprisingly, that's one of the biggest things to get people into stable employment. And that's stuff like communication, right? And personal hygiene, just things that we take for granted, but.
Yeah, so just to be clear, what you're talking about is some wraparound services with the individuals who will be working as the day laborers.
Exactly.
Which is,
So
I
in
think, really
Oklahoma
important.
City, their program is they pick up panhandlers for that day. They bring them into the program. If they want to do the day's work, then they can, and they'll get the wages. But then they're now into the system, and they have access to a caseworker who helps them through the program. Yes, ma'am. Oh, sorry.
You're fine. We're pretty flexible.
I was gonna say, I remember in retreat asking for this, but also during that time period, I was thinking about places that could, because you said panhandlers, but I was also thinking we have people released from Cleveland County Detention Center without transportation that need access to stability. And then I was wondering, would this go by food and shelter or a friend's house, Salvation Army? And could some of that litter crew, if it is in the right of way and the public, also address maybe some of the issues, or, because you have people coming and going through these neighborhoods, and we do see stuff in the neighborhoods too.
Curb gutter sidewalk.
Yeah, anything between the sidewalk and the street is right-of-way that we can access. And then there's also, this is something that, throwing it out there.
Yeah.
But what we could do if we wanted is get permission in a neighborhood too, right? If you get the property owners to say it's okay to come on the property, and you have release liability, I could see that could be a thing. Is that right, Catherine? You're a lawyer.
Keep us out of jail, Kevin.
We just have to be careful we're not using public funds for private benefits. That's always.
But I would say too, like if you thought about a street like Reed Street, which is right across from Food and Shelter, and you asked those property owners, and they said yes, like that. I mean, because of the impact of that shelter on that neighborhood, that wouldn't have like conflicts.
Yeah, that's an area we can look at. I mean, there may be ways to focus efforts in certain areas where it's having a detrimental effect beyond just the private property owner.
Yeah.
And our ability to engage in a relationship with a service provider, and those, we may discover all kinds of opportunities going forward, and that may require an expansion of the service or modifications to the agreement. So I'm sure we'll all learn a lot when we start heading down this path together. As long as we've got a good relationship with a good service provider, I'm sure we'll be able to remain nimble and meet those needs.
And that's why we left it so flexible too, because that way the group who's going to do this can say, you know, this is how we can meet these needs, you know, and we're not putting them in a prescriptive, you know, I put a name on it, but again, that's not required. That's just a title, if you will. You know? So I think there are many ways that the program could be developed, and I think there are many great ways that it could be developed. And I'm excited to see the actual program proposals that we get. Because I have a feeling, just talking to the people in the community, that they also think that this can be a great way to help people. And so, and not just help people, but, you know, come on, this is 2 wins, right? Because we're helping these folks who really do need this help, right? You need a job. You also need these soft skills. You also need to feel like you're doing, I don't know, there's something about anyway, whatever. You need that feeling. But we're also going to pick up trash. We're going to make our community look better. And then people are going to be like, oh, wow, okay, we can all get along because they're not being whatever.
When you get emails about, look what I found next to my building this morning before work, that's where we thought, you know what? There's a lot of that traffic on Main Street, and if we just hit Main Street every morning and Gray Street, and then, you know, it's probably not an hour of the day. Just doing Main Street and Gray Street, and now go about the work orders of where we need to focus. And even that concept, and every time we talk, I learned something new about that whole concept of, the program starts out rural. And my whole thought when we were having this conversation was urban, and now I recognize the value of rural litter pickup and the water quality improvements to be made. And lo and behold, you pick up the trash before one of our mowers goes over it. You're picking up 1 piece instead of 80 pieces when it comes out the back of the mower. So lots of value added.
We also don't have to pay for a broken windshield if it hits someone.
That's true.
There's that too. So what would we provide? Those are the things that we want the nonprofit to provide. So what will we provide? Funding, obviously. Don't ask me where. Daryl knows, so you know that's all. That's your.
We were spending that money out of
That's
general
your
fund, and
thing.
now we'll spend some out of solid waste.
We'll
And
give
Chris
him the-
cringes, but we love you anyway, Chris.
Yeah, utilities is broke. I will say that we are broke. Utilities is broke. There, saying it out loud. Utilities is broke. Dodge ProMaster 2023 van. We have that we could dedicate. It's got 9 seats and 1 driver, so that could be 8 workers and a supervisor and a driver, or however they plan to do it. We'll do the fuel and the maintenance on the vehicle. Of course, litter disposal, right? We'll
We
handle that.
anticipate stacks of orange bags in places, and then Chris's crew goes by and just picks up orange bags, and it should be very, very efficient in terms of getting the
And
litter
get
to where it
metrics with
belongs.
it. Just saying, get metrics.
Yeah, that was my question, was DEQ will be getting the numbers on that?
Yes, ma'am. Anything that I'm gonna touch that has trash involved, we will have metrics because I need to report that, so just like, you know. Yes.
Yeah.
But also, I will say that part of the RFP, we asked for the nonprofit to develop an evaluation method and also a reporting method, because we expect them to do that. So that's something else we can tweak. And then, of course, project oversight to make sure they're doing what we ask them to do. There could be other city requirements in the negotiations. Here's the plan timeline. It's pretty much done. I just need to get a couple more eyes on it. And then we're ready to send it out. Submission deadline, end of December, so that they have the holidays to get through as well. Interviews as we need through January, and then selection in January. And then I said March for the final kickoff, but that's to give time for contract negotiation. We might be done before then. It could be earlier.
So it would come to council for an award of a contract and working with whoever winds up the successful proposer to be able to come up with artwork and a name for the program and, you know, what it is we're going to wrap that van in. But it should be known that these efforts are underway, and we take litter seriously. And when they see that driving up and down Main Street and Gray Street, there's value to having a clean downtown. And if that's where all the foot traffic is, then by all means, maybe some of the crowd helping to add to the litter problem will be the same crowd helping clean it up. So that all came out of your retreat. So thank you. If we're on the right track, you let us know.
Councilmember Holman.
So, I like the name Norman Neat Team,
Oh, I
or Norman Neat Crew, or something like that. Norman Neat something. Chris, when was the last time we had a rate increase for solid waste? Or,
I believe 2011 or 12.
so over a decade ago. So, I don't know, something like,
to have a program out and
Year
about being
two.
visible before you ask for a rate increase, there's something to
Yeah.
be said about just being,
continue to fund this
Recognizable.
successful program could be a way to get that through, but I think getting it off the ground and then figuring out how we want to fund it going forward, whether through that fund or general fund, if there's an issue there and we can't get a rate increase or whatever. So, but I think it's something, yeah, keeping track of the data on it and being able to show this is how much has been picked up over this period of time that the program has been going. My expectation of it would definitely be like a dragnet sweep of downtown, not even just Gray and Main Street, but like crisscrossing all the high profile
streets, yeah.
areas, the high traffic areas, which is all of downtown really, but yeah, Campus Corner, the main parks in the central Norman area, and then expanding out from there and, you know, as needed, would be what I would have in mind with this, like full comprehensive, we're gonna clean up the whole city here.
and there are places that you probably
Clean
would
up
like to
this
touch
town.
every day, and other places
Man,
like
Goldie was-
once a week, let's make our way to the lake, or once a week, we need to make our way, you know, and put eyes on certain parts of town.
Yeah, it would seem like some locations may only need once a week or once every 2 weeks, but some may need to be visited every morning. And, you know, so that's kind of what I would have in mind and be willing to support for sure.
And with the behavioral health expertise from current service providers in that space, our ability to gather additional data on, you know, folks being able to kind of graduate from this program into, you know, more long-term employment status. And, you know, and even April shared with me a gentleman we met during the point in time survey in January of 2020. And just recently, that individual gainfully employed and permanently housed. It was 3 years. It was a long 3 years, but we got there. She asked me if I remembered. I said, you know, I'll never forget that guy. It was 9 o'clock at night and freezing cold in the wooded area north of Crest Grocery Store, and it was a little dicey during the interview, but success happens. It happens one story at a time, and we could have 8 stories happening all simultaneously through this program. So we will continue. Excellent. The other van.
That's what I was gonna ask. Yep.
So Anthony helped us in the original RFP before we had vans. We didn't know what we were going to get, but now we have the vans, and I think the ability for us to modify the former RFP for to be available for all nonprofits to say, now we have this van with this fully ADA accessible vehicle. How could you positively impact those in need in Norman. And I think we'll get a much broader participation in response to that RFP, similar to what went out originally. We didn't have I think what came back was a response for the $1.3 million annual program that I think shocked everybody, and nobody had their nonprofit status at that time. But I think we're in a much different place, and we anticipate much better results.
Councilmember Grant.
Yeah, speaking of that one ask that you got, again, going back to retreat times, the thought there with the second one was kind of getting into the loop of mental health care crisis response. And I will just say, talking in the community, doesn't matter where you fall on the political spectrum, people are choosing an alternative because they want a trained mental health care professional to come handle their loved one when they're, drunk, passed out, maybe overdosing on their porch, or if they have somebody who's, talking suicidal ideations. So that RFP, is it about mental health crisis response or?
Well,
Anthony saw it last, so it turns his eyes on.
so really, I mean, what it was last time was specifically geared towards transportation to and from homeless service locations, so like food and shelter, library, whatever shelter is available at the time, to and from those services, specifically for people experiencing homelessness. If, and it sounds like there has been a lot of different, since then, ideas of what's been thrown around. So right now, I'm not quite sure what that has evolved into. There are a lot of different needs that could be met by this van. So I think, without hearing one specific direction, it would be geared towards really nonprofits in the community and what they think the best and highest use would be for that van. And then we take the, proposals that we get and then we decide and bring you a contract. So,
We can tailor that RFP any way council
Yes.
sees appropriate.
I was going to say the original ask for both of them was for mental health crisis response. And I have no problem putting this other one into litter patrol and helping people get wraparound services that way. But I will just say from personal experience, having to call 988, it is not an equitable system to get an alternative. You have to know somebody who's got the number that you can call for COCMHC to come with their mobile crisis response and deal with that person. And I do recognize that both MPD and whoever is the mental health care provider have a similar set of criteria. But when you're dealing with certain situations and, people know their loved one best and how they'll respond to different providers, I really feel strongly that this RFP needs to be about mental health crisis response.
So we
Like
can
a
be
main
very
component.
targeted,
Yes.
in exactly who.
And it could be
We send that
somebody
out
who
too.
shows up at, I got a call from the chimney place on Gray Street who said there was a man who came in ranting and raving about needing to get to a dental appointment. And, I asked them, have you heard about 988? And they're like, what's that? But, when I think about these situations that come, especially to some downtown businesses, but in neighborhoods too, it's people have compassion and they want a response that isn't going to net a negative outcome for the individual they're calling on. So, yeah, I just want to make that very clear.
So with council consensus, it's an opportunity to target that
Yeah,
RFP.
so I'm really glad that you brought this up because I was also going to bring this up if nobody else did, that I think the original intent in us purchasing these vans was around creating some kind of mobile crisis, mental health crisis unit or entity. And I know that a lot of that got slowed during the conversation of 998 coming on board with the state and kind of nationwide. And I think we've had enough time to really see, what 988 is doing and maybe what it is not doing. And, we were ready as a community to start funding this type of program. And I think in many ways it was okay to see what the capacity of 988 was going to be and what that rollout was going to look like and how it was going to actually improve this. And I would say that there's been some growing pains with that and maybe not exactly what we were hoping to build out when we were initially having these conversations. So
Gaps are now being identified.
so I would really like to see the second van back in that original focus of mental health.
And I would like to, you know, kind of, and not saying that that would not be a good use, I'm just thinking like, when I, specifically, because I'm the one who drafted the RFP, I really thought maybe, and this is maybe, because that was more towards like mass transportation, like transportation service directly geared towards people experiencing homelessness, which it was a little bit broader, which is I think why we bought a larger van that could house more people, right? I just want to put out there that if this is something that council is interested in doing, I don't necessarily, it might be a better idea not to tie it to this specific van, because you may have an agency who is willing and able to provide that service, but they're probably not gonna need 9 seats, and we may be able to meet that need with a smaller and less expensive vehicle, and use this vehicle, which is ADA accessible, to be able to house more people at one time in a different use. So I just don't wanna like, you know, if that's something that council wants to do, obviously they should do that, but if we can do that with a smaller vehicle, because it's a one-on-one usually when you're in a mental health crisis response, instead of like going out and, you know, providing transportation to 9 people with a large van. Now, if that's something that they need a large van like that, then obviously then we can look into that. I just don't want to necessarily box them into using this huge van. Does that make sense?
Yes.
He's wise beyond his heights.
It does, but I also don't want to lose the conversation that honestly was a fight for multiple budget cycles to get money and allocate towards mental health, mobile crisis response. And I feel like we continue to divert from that original conversation and the intent of council to create something like that. So I understand what you're saying about this specific vehicle, but that does also not change our intent around mental health providing. And I would say too, if we are thinking about more along the lines of something that's a little different, like I think that it should also include wraparound services, social work, to the second van as well, just like we're doing with, you know, the litter, whatever we're gonna call the litter control van, because I think that we have a lack of caseworkers and social workers, and the more opportunities that we can provide space for that in our community to you know, be able to reach out and connect and communicate with more of our residents in that vein is really important. So I'd like to hear others feeling. I'll recognize Councilmember Montoya first.
So I too strongly concur and agree with Councilmember Grant and Councilmember Schuler. You know, this ban, it's my understanding through the conversations and at our retreat that this is what it was for. And I mean, and I had a personal experience. And there was an unhoused individual in my neighborhood, and I tried to call 988, and they were no help. So, I mean, there's really no one else for me to call. I mean, I did call Norman Caravan, so, and they were able to get her help. But so, you know, we just start having these situations, and so we really need something like this so that when a crisis like that happens, when you have an individual who's having a mental crisis and they are walking up and down a street because they're trying to find their lost children, this is an individual that our community members need to have a resource to call to help these people.
So, and I think to ask those potential service providers, here is an opportunity with assets we have to contribute. They would know, those service providers would know, is signage on the van a positive or is it a negative? Those are interesting thoughts that I don't know. Should it be identifiable as mobile crisis, or should it be very, very vanilla when it comes rolling into that scenario? But I think the service providers that we would contact and be in communication with through this RFP process would have great insight into how do you package that response unit? Does it look like an ambulance? Does it look like just a, you know, bread truck driving through the neighborhood?
Yeah, well, I think too, just as we're exploring this conversation about what this might look like, I'm not trying to, I know we like to allow for whoever's gonna respond to the RFP, to build out a program and to kind of tell us what their needs and things are. So like, I don't wanna say like, we need to tailor it to this, but like, is there an opportunity to have some kind of dual purpose where, there is an opportunity to use this if we have mobile crisis, but also when it is not in service, that it is being used to transport individuals? Like, I don't know how to like craft an RFP, or like, can we be a little bit more broad to say that like, these are things that we would like to see, and provide some more opportunity for a little bit more targeted response
Yeah.
to the service that could be used.
Absolutely, and I think that, again, I want to kind of shift away, because the original RFP was, I think, for something a lot different.
Yeah.
And it was, again, because we expected 988 to fill this need. If it's not being filled, then I think, again, we need to revisit this issue and issue an RFP. But and like I said, and I think part of how I would say is, like, we have this van, right? I'm assuming that a service like this could use it. Maybe it's not optimal, but in the meantime, they could use it, and maybe we could work on providing something better while, but we could use the van in the meantime, right? So that would be how I would craft the RFP, saying, hey, either this or through the RFP process, if this van does not suit your need, feel free to propose an alternative. or what
Identify
you would
another
need. Yeah.
type
And
of
then-
vehicle.
Because we could use the van, I'm sure, somehow, if it's not optimal for their purposes, and we could, work on that. But I think also, if we're talking about an RFP, and from a staff perspective, drafting this RFP, I also, the van service in the original RFP, the only, service that the city was providing would be use of the van, maintenance of the van, and gas, right? If there's not currently already, this kind of mobile response unit in the community that is not being provided, they will make, just offering that alone as an incentive is probably not enough to start an entire program that from the ground up. So unless it's supplementing an existing service, just providing a van, maintenance, and gas is probably not going to result in, enough of a,
They'll most likely say van and X dollars a month for,
Sure, okay.
And it can be drafted to allow for that.
and it can, yeah. So I just, and if that's the council's goals, I just want to make sure that, whatever we put out there is sufficient to get a package that you guys want.
Okay.
yeah.
Councilmember Grant.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, so I'm hearing transport, maybe people around that need it. Again, maybe if a guy is at the chimney place on Gray saying, acting away because he needs a dental appointment, that business owner could call whoever gets this RFP who's doing transport somewhere and is like, I will be right there, and I'll help this man get to his dentist appointment or whatever it is he needs. Is that correct?
and I see that as, whether it's actually to an appointment, if there ever was an appointment, or to the thing that we need to follow up upon and check the status of, are those urgent care beds that the State Department of Mental Health said Cleveland County and McLean County were the two counties not served that should be served through this process the state's going through. With such urgent care beds available, whenever they're available and by whom, wonderful opportunity for, when we talk transport, to have a place to transport to where not inpatient but 23-hour care can be provided. And I think right now a challenge would be for any service provider is, I can go make contact with this individual, but I may not have a place to take them where they can be served to help them through the immediate crisis. But I think we do need to follow up and find out what the status of those 53 or 54 urgent care beds are. That is, I think, the place where several folks would receive the service when we're calling because they're in crisis.
Well, and to add to the URC update, sobering center with that, because also you could
Yeah,
have
that's correct.
situations where maybe it's a cooling off period.
Yeah. So do we feel comfortable with kind of what Anthony has proposed based on the consensus of our conversation around still it being transport, but I mean, I think having some kind of social work component or casework component to the van would be really helpful, just in because I think that, you know, when we're dealing with individuals that are experiencing homelessness, like these are really critical services and like technical skills that I think someone who's operating even a transport service should have. And I think it would benefit the, you know, provider or the contracted person in that. Does that feel the way that we're moving? And you can characterize it maybe another time for us to say like where we're going.
And we could bring that draft back.
You will need to be brought back, because I need to
Okay,
make sure.
so
that
we'll
it's
we'll
major
bring the draft
application.
back and then we'll discuss.
Yep,
Okay,
fine tune
But
it.
do you have what you need? Do you think?
I think so. And
Okay.
if not, I will make sure I get it. So,
Okay. Perfect. Any other comments about this? Okay, thank you for all of your work on the litter patrol and all of that. I'm really excited to finally, hopefully get these vans into our
Absolutely.
community. So, thank you so much. All right, we will move on to our final agenda item, an update on public pantry policy. So I recognize Jason Olson, Parks Director.
Hello. So, handing out an application, so we kind of realized, along with everything that went along with the pantry at Oakhurst, that that Parks didn't really have a true application process for putting a permanent fixture in a park. So kind of rewind everybody and jog some memories about the pantry. The pantry was placed at Oakhurst Park. It was placed here sometime during the pandemic. We really don't know when. Parks did not know it was placed, nor did we discover it was there until somebody that lived in that neighborhood made us swear. There was worries behind of what was done with it or what was happening with it, because it looked like it got, he sent us pictures of vandalism and things that kind of happened, what he said frequently. We also had other instances of things popping up in parks that we didn't know about or did not get permission for those to be in there, such as trees, planter boxes, benches, you kind of named of,
Gardens.
exactly. They're, and we're happy to house those, but, and those to be in parks because it is the residents' green areas. And we want to make sure that everybody that has a place in parks and everything has what can be placed in parks. But we just wanted to make sure that as we go through this process and kind of look at it, we want to get a more formal application process. So when somebody wants to put something in a park, that there is some kind of process to go along with that. And from what we understand, either the city manager or the director of Parks and Recreation has the right to put something in a park, but we also like to have that go through someone, a committee that would recommend that to either the director or the city manager, and that naturally fits within our park board of commissioners. So what you see right here is kind of an application that we came up with. We have ran this through park board on a couple of meetings. We have not adopted it in any way, but this is just basically an application with some rules. So you kind of go through here. We want to make sure that there's somebody responsible for whatever organization or group that puts it in there, and it could be an Eagle Scout or it could be a community group around anywhere in town that wants to put that in there. We want a 1-year commitment. We also want this group to be committed to going back by and checking this, whatever gets placed in a park on a frequent basis. You kind of see there, if within a 3-month period, we want them to go out there and at least give us some kind of report 3 out of 4 months, or 4 out of the 12 months, excuse me. We want to make sure there's adult supervision that goes along with that, depending on what it is. We want to make sure that everybody's safe, wearing the proper gear when they're installing it or going and checking on it. Also, if there's anything that goes wrong with it or vandalized, we either want that group to respond to the Norman PD or our parks manager. And it kind of goes on, and you kind of look down through the bottom of it, and it kind of suggests what would be a permanent fixture, anything from community gardens to park furniture, Eagle Scouts, maintain flower beds, trees, things like that. And then when you're going to go over to look at the application process, it's basically wanting the group to apply for it, also work with our park department, make sure that we're placing it in a correct location. Does it fit in a neighborhood park, or would it be best if this thing gets installed, would it be best to put it in one of the community parks or a specialty park? We also want 30 days to review that application and make sure that we have a chance to stick it on a park board agenda. And if it needs to be a kind of a review or a presentation that goes along with that, we want to make sure we get that scheduled. Long story short, this is what we put together. We went to park board, I believe, in September, presented this and kind of told them what was going on with the pantry. And like I said, we've had several. We even had reports of somebody doing like almost a drive-by tree planting in a park where somebody pulled over a car, somebody ran out of the back of a vehicle with a tree, planted it really quick, and got back in the car. So it's kind of crazy things that we've gone through there. But we want to make sure that the groups that want to be involved at parks, we just want to make sure they go through a proper process. We're aware of it, and it's not going to become a future maintenance nightmare for us. And so kind of turn it back to you for any questions, bounce it off a little bit. But we plan on adopting this either in December or January through park board, and then rolling it out after that.
Councilmember Grant.
I know whenever we talked about this, we talked about bees.
Hmm?
You know, the last thing you would want to find, I guess, depending on where the park is a beehive that somebody decided it would be smart to put. But like, what kind of projects besides bees could you see saying yes to, but being hyper mindful about like where it goes?
So we actually somebody been contacted a couple times about bee colonies, and in some park systems actually there's areas you can put that would work. We had a lot of worries about putting a bee colony inside of a park, not because of the fear or anything like that, but it was just we want to make sure those bees aren't vandalized. So if you put it in certain areas, people be crazy. We want to make sure that if something goes in there, it's safe, especially if it's live insects or something like that. So we actually passed them on to the utilities, and we found a place out at, I think, Water Reclamation. Yeah, that we put out there. But when you talk about things that we can see that we want to go through there, is we get a lot of Eagle Scout requests, and those requests could be anything from putting in a flagpole to a park to redoing a gazebo or building a dugout. That we've had those requests, and if we they have to check so many boxes that goes along with that, and part of it is even addressing part of this in a public forum. So we can actually help check one of those boxes on that Eagle Scout, just depending on what it is. But it can be anything. I don't want to limit or try to think about what it is. We're getting some requests about putting in pollinators, and we're all about that. And we actually there's a certain individual around town that will actually give them equipment occasionally when they want to go out and do some pollinators, depending on where it is. But they work with us before they go out there and plant milkweed to make sure that that's somewhere where we don't mow, or that's somewhere that we don't spray. So is this all these things that we would like to work with the public. We just want to make sure that if it gets installed, it once again doesn't become a maintenance nightmare.
So I could even see artists who might have an idea and want to approach parks, and I'm sure you would work with NAC if you did get approached by artists, let's say.
Yeah. If our artist does approach us, we would probably work with the Public Art Committee to make sure that hits all the check marks and make sure that it's something that's needed, figure out where it would be placed in. The Norman Art Council is a great resource to work with local artists to put that in there. So when you kind of talk about that, the lightning bugs is one of those things that we got approached from artists, and then eventually went to turn them to the Norman Art Council, and the Norman Art Council worked with them to help them get funding, and we placed that at Ruby Grant.
Thank you.
Do you see any uses that we're gonna be like expressly prohibiting? That like, that you would not entertain an application from? And then subsequently, what is the review criteria going to be? And is it gonna be standardized, or is it just gonna be an arbitrary, like, yes or no of the Parks Board?
All good question. But beforehand, it was very arbitrary. So somebody would ask the director, and the director would just say yes or no without any review. I think this kind of makes it a lot more formalized. Prohibited, if we get something that we think that might not check out, there is a chance that we probably wouldn't let it go to the park board, or we would turn to the city attorney's office and kind of get an opinion on, if that would be a good placement, or if that would be legal, or if that would do some kind of public harm. But we want to make sure that, everything gets placed. We would communicate with the person for sure.
Okay, so it would be kind of a discussion back and forth, but this is a process that formalizes all of that, which I really appreciate. So I noticed here that they have a minimum of a 1-year commitment. So like some of these projects would be, I could see potentially being something that would need to be maintained, over time, or, is there any, I guess, provision of like, if you build it, then you have to remove it if you're not going to continue to maintain it? Because like what I don't want to see happen is that, that then gets on parks to maintain something moving forward that, we don't have the budget to do, and we get all these things in the park. I mean, just, so like, is there going to be any talk about like, hey, you put in a whatever? I mean, like, I guess a gazebo, like, we know, like, if they're rebuilding something, then that's different. But like, you put in a community garden, and you dig up all this land and all of that kind of stuff, like, but then they don't want to maintain it after a year, what happens?
That would
Just grass.
I don't think that we could force anybody to come take anything out, and most of the time we have the proper equipment it wouldn't be too difficult for us to take out. And kind of a good example of what you're talking about, and most of the time it's pretty easy, but we want to make sure to maintain. Like over at Rotary Park, we have a library that this simply opens up doors. You put books in, you take it. We discovered through one of our employees walking through there, somebody stole the doors or took the doors. It was completely gone. We called the group that we knew who put it in, and they came back out within a couple weeks and put the door back on there, and they immediately came out and make sure the books were protected. But something like that, you have to think too, an individual or a group is not going to have like a large, in most instances, is not going to have a whole lot of funding. So gazebo, I think that's somewhere in the neighborhood of $15,000 to $20,000 if you do it correctly. And we wouldn't necessarily accept somebody that's coming in there and buying a gazebo at Home Depot and wanting to put it up.
Yeah, so there's some review around what kind of materials they're using.
Yeah, it would have to be a commercial grade, and make sure that that would have to be properly engineered so that it couldn't blow over or cause danger or something like that.
Okay. So when do you think that this process will be finally voted on by Parks Board and then implemented so that individuals can start working their stuff through the process?
If y'all don't have much feedback or questions, it would be probably December when we adopt it, and then with the 30-day process, it would probably the first time we could hear something would be either January or February.
Okay, Councilmember Grant, thanks.
I was going to say to that, things that, fall into disrepair or whatever, could there be like a decommission process where, like, you tried to find the group, went through the steps, and then it's like a notice, like, okay, this asset, because we're going to get called. Like, if it, let's just use the gazebo example, it was built X years ago, now it's going down. That next council person's going to hear about it. So is there a way to kind of let the community know, hey, this isn't coming, this was left to, I was also thinking about a community garden, because that would be something you get called about too, if it just disappeared one day. So
Things that get put in parks, and this is the reason we want to make sure we formalize this process. We have things in our parks that got placed by people's, right now, that we get calls on if we go out and trim a certain bush or go out there and do any work around a gazebo or something like that. We get calls that, hey, my grandfather put that in. There's going to be an immediate attachment to anything that is considered a permanent fixture in the park. And this, we would have a way to keep track of it, but we do have a pretty good idea of most of the things that are placed in parks that were put there by a community group or a family, because they're very aware, and we go out there and mow, or the wind blows, or somebody spray paints it, we get put on notice pretty quick. But we think this will help. And yes, if we have to remove something because it falls within disrepair, we will be in communication with that group.
Okay.
People
That
are
would be
very
somewhere in
passionate
the
about things in
process.
parks, very passionate.
Yeah, well, I think also, to your point, though, it's not just the group, but, maybe putting a sign out saying, this is the process or something, just to kind of like prepare the community for, as you say, the decommissioning, because I think that's the right word. Information is power, and communication to our residents, I think, goes a long way.
And this is another example. At a Rotary Park, we had an Eagle Scout project where they put a raised garden in there, and he had an expiration with that. So once that hits a certain day, he built it. He's out there maintaining it, and that's how he checks the boxes to become an Eagle Scout. So once that program expires, we have an agreement to go out there and remove it.
Perfect. Other feedback, questions?
If I can kind of.
Sure.
Perhaps provide some input, because I think going to one of your questions and also something that Jason said, typically like stuff that could pose liability to the city. And I think it deserves to be mentioned just because this is kind of what brought the discussion up, is the pantry. And I, based on, is there anything, your question was, is there anything that would probably be something that was just an outright no? And I just want to I do want to put it out there that the pantry would probably, due to liability reasons, have an opinion from the city attorney's office that would probably pose a pretty large liability.
Can you explain what we think the liability is?
Yes, and so, so for example, like harkening back to the community resource refrigerator ordinance that we put in place. I don't know, I think Coleman, maybe you were the only one on council at that time, but.
I was here.
Oh, you were, okay. So you guys will remember that, during that discussion, for similar reasons, that, community resources refrigerators are only allowed on private property. And the reason for that is because, there are some protections for people who, one, donate food under the Good Samaritan Act, and two, nonprofits or governmental entities that distribute those food items, right? Now, there are some minimum requirements that those distributors have to maintain, right? Like you have to be, it has to be packaged, and it has to, maintain federal label requirements and stuff like that. But again, that was not necessarily, like, those protections don't necessarily apply when, for example, you put a pantry in a park. We are not the distributor, right? Because it's just located on our property. So we would not be immune from liability under the Good Samaritan Act, which is, I think part of what was anticipated with the private property owners and the community resource refrigerators. On the other hand, right, even if you are covered by the Good Samaritan Act, it doesn't apply in all situations, right? Intentional misconduct or gross negligence, like, you can still avoid those protections, and you can still kind of get to the eventual person who's distributing or it's on their property. The city, as a property owner, has certain duties to invitees, the people we're inviting to the park, right? Some of those duties may be non-delegable, meaning we can't necessarily shift those responsibilities to a third party, so we may not even be able to contract that liability away. And, I think you have a lot of liability because you were putting food items that, are likely perishable under good conditions and extreme weather conditions, like even resource refrigerators, right? Those theoretically are temperature controlled, right? The stuff that you're putting out in just just the open air, exposed to the elements, those are exposed, and those are likely not necessarily, intended for that kind of environment. And we are not putting eyes on them, right? The community resource refrigerator regulations require those regular checks, right? So we as a the property owner, we still have that duty, right? So again, either one, we would have to, put some sort of system in place that those are being checked on a very regular basis, which I don't even think, because it is a come and go operation where no one is accepting the donations, there is really no protection for that. So at a certain level, you're always going to be exposed to some level of risk, right? But, the city would have to kind of take on that responsibility because, and to be fair, the mutual aid, which is the community giving back to the community and allowing like everyone to participate, from a liability standpoint, that's just not a model that is easy to mitigate risk from, right? So, because in a way the community is responsible for it, so there's no one person who the liability can be shifted to, other than, in this case, the property owner, which would be the city.
Yeah. So I guess my question around that is, yes, this did come up because of the pantry that was placed at Oakhurst Park. Has this been communicated to the people that operate that specific pantry? And are they aware that this is going to be the outcome?
Did they remove that one?
They removed it and placed it on
yes.
private property.
But, I mean, with the understanding that as we work through this process, that it might be able to go back. And so have we communicated with them?
I have not communicated that with them.
I think that it would probably be helpful to let them know that this is the outcome of, us going through formalizing a process and looking at what potentially may be allowable, because they're going to be upset about this. But I mean, we need to, I think, be the people to reach out and say, this is why, and this is the path moving forward, and hopefully that their arrangement with the private property is going well, but
So all of the protections exist to private property owners, but none of the protections exist for public property owners.
Honestly, I mean, keep in mind you have to be a nonprofit entity or government agency to be a distributor under the Good Samaritan Act, right? So technically, I mean, I think it's even, I don't think those protections would necessarily apply to someone who just puts, a pantry in their front yard for the community to have access to. They're not donating that to a nonprofit entity. I don't think they would be afforded that protection.
So their homeowners insurance could get a hit.
and has that been tested in
I
the
mean,
at all in the court? Like, has anybody brought a pantry?
so if
Like,
it-
I got sick at this public pantry and
Yeah, I'm
I'm
suing.
sued for damages. Like, is that?
So the ability for, us to, the likelihood that that would make it into a system that we could research it would be pretty slim, right? Because in order to, have that information, in order to be quote unquote tested by the courts, right, most of that stuff isn't necessarily published on a wide scale for use as precedent. So that would not be something that would be easy to find, right? Because like, let's say if someone just brings a suit in Cleveland County, right, that probably went through the insurance process beforehand, potentially through their homeowner's insurance. Then you also have the fact, so would it have been tested in courts? Probably not, but probably because that would never have made it to that point.
Yeah, I mean, I do understand. I just think that I have been frustrated, and I think the community refrigerator conversation was frustrating. I think we ultimately ended up in a fairly good place with that. But then this is another conversation about how we're continuing to make it difficult for our community to address gaps and needs around, mutual aid and getting and addressing food insecurity, which is, the issue here. But, I'm wondering too, that we do have the Share Center coming online, which is a new resource to address food insecurity, as well as the one at McFarland is, being expanded with their, master plan update. But still, it does seem from a public perspective that we continue to put roadblocks in these things. I understand liability and I understand that your duty is to protect the city for those things, but just as kind of an aside or an observation, like I can understand how the community who is actively trying to support others and provide mutual aid find that the city is, making these things difficult for them. Councilmember Grant?
Yeah, so I wasn't on council, but I did work with the city on that fridge ordinance. And I will say we don't have a 24/7 community fridge quite back in the community yet, and it's been about 2 years-ish. So when we do these things, they do have impact. And the mutual aid part of all of that is basically saying that the systems in place from nonprofits to the government don't have our backs, and that's why that system exists, to operate outside of that. So respect to there's liability, because I see it when it comes through my emails about people tripping over things that are construction or driving into construction that wasn't clearly marked. I get that, but I just have to point that necessary part out. And then yeah, I would say too, like, is this pantry process, if it goes out, like, do they have to actually get like a permit like we did with the fridge?
So that's a good question, right? Because the community resource refrigerator only applies to literal refrigerators, right? There's nothing stopping a private property owner from, putting a pantry on their own private property and like assuming that risk themselves. With the caveat that like if it gets to a certain point where it, gets dirty or nasty, then that could become a code issue. Obviously, if they're invested in it, that's not going to get to that point, right? So, I mean, there is no permit process or requirement for it to be on private property now at this time, unless it's a refrigerator.
And then also I would just say maybe we should pay attention to what Boston's doing, and if they're getting sued there, because they have community fridge guidelines, not a actual permit like we adopted. But I mean, I would pay attention to the communities that are operating these things, and if their community members are getting sick and suing them, or if things are actually just kind of, because the people involved care and understand the systems we're working in, actually are coming back through. And I see them get decommissioned too online, like, it reaches its life cycle end because these can be donated fridges. So, extreme weather makes them kind of short circuit. But, again, get the liability part, but also just want to say the human part. So, thank you.
Yeah. Any other comments, discussion around this item? Okay. Well, thank you for the work. I think we're obviously good with this process and hope to see, some other kind of projects moving forward in the parks. So with that, go ahead. Do you have?
That's at us too.
Okay, yeah. And with that, if we have nothing else, then we are adjourned.